So I'd like to welcome Dr. Kristen Muller, Impact Analyst for Suny Online, and she will, I'm sure most of you know her, she will be deciphering online learning data during COVID-19. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Jen. And welcome everyone. Thanks for joining me to talk about data right before lunch. I'm sure it's, exciting to all of you as it is exciting to me. So I am going to talk a little bit about data definitions that we have for Suny. I'm going to talk about some of the reporting that has happened, that typically happens, and then also what has happened during COVID-19, our transition to remote learning, and show you some of the trends as we know it at this moment, and also talk a little bit about what's missing and what's to come, and share some of the survey insights from some national surveys that were conducted during COVID, and then just talk about some considerations moving forward. So that's the plan for the hour. Please feel free at any time to put some questions in the chat. I would love to not be just lecturing the whole time. So please, if you have questions at any time, feel free to interject. Alrighty. So a lot of this should be familiar to most of you when we're talking about definitions, but I want to just make sure I review them so we're all on the same page. So for an online program, we know that in New York State, as per New York State Ed, it's an academic program that offers 50% or more of the course requirements in an online or distance format. So we've talked a lot about this recently. We talked about the new requirements for declaring online programs with middle states, and as you know, that those have to be approved by state ed. We talked about that earlier in the week when we talked about regulations. So this has not changed. This is the definition. When we talk about online programs for Suny, we try to classify them as being 50%, 75%, or 100% online, just so we can have that transparency for students, because it can be a little bit confusing that our definition is 50% or more. That is not the case nationwide or from state to state. For iPads, it is fully online when we're asking if a program is online. So there are those differences which can make it a little bit difficult to benchmark things and to compare. But for New York State, again, that is our definition, is 50% or more. And then within Suny, we have different classifications of programs. We have the signature programs, which are formerly known as Open Suny Plus, which is that subset of programs that provides an additional layer of supports for students and faculty. And those programs are nominated and approved to be a signature program. And many of you have signature programs on your campuses, and that's awesome. And we're continuing to go through that process to approve more programs. And then we have Suny Online Degrees at Scale, or what we first called the Suny Online Initiative when we got started almost 2 years ago now with that initiative. And that's that even smaller subset of programs that we are marketing nationwide, and we've brought on coaches to support, and we're doing things in a little bit of a different, more centralized way with that subset. And again, those go through a review process and get selected. And this presentation is not about either of those things, but if you have questions about the signature programs or degrees at scale, of course, let us know. We'll be happy to answer them. But just wanted to kind of provide that layer of detail about programs. For course sections, we've again talked about this a lot over the past year because of the remote transition, but these are the definitions that we use in Cirrus. Cirrus is the system for data transmission within the system. So your institutional research offices submit data to Suny system on regular points throughout the semester and throughout the year. And we ask all of the campuses to align with a certain framework and definitions when they submit that data. So things are coming to us in a way that we can actually use to understand what things look like across the system. So even though your campus may use some different terms, may have slightly different definitions for different course section types, everything should be coming back to these definitions here. There should be a crosswalk to these instruction types. So we have not online, there's no direct instruction delivered online. We have asynchronous, which of course, as you know, is delayed, right? Students can do things at different times. Synchronous, they're meeting at real time. Combined, which is a combination of asynchronous and synchronous. And then there's hybrid, which we don't consider to be an online instruction type. That is where a portion of the time is spent face-to-face in a classroom. So that is different than combined. I just want to make sure that one is clear because sometimes it gets a little confusing, but the combined type is still fully online. It's just combining synchronous and asynchronous modalities. Hybrid requires a portion of the instruction to be done in person. So we don't consider that to be an online instruction type. So I've highlighted the three that we typically combine when we're trying to say this is the number of online course sections that we have at Suny. It's typically the asynchronous, synchronous, and combined types that we say are fully online courses. And this is really important because this is also what we've typically used to try to understand a student's online enrollment patterns. We take a look at what course sections they've taken, and we'll say what percentage of their course sections are online. So we need to be able to say which ones are online. So again, those in green are the ones that we've classified as online. In purple, we have HighFlex. HighFlex is our newest course section type. A few of our campuses were piloting this and getting started with HighFlex just a couple of years ago, and we added this course type recently. And then, of course, with the expansion to remote, HighFlex has become even more important, and more folks are starting to try out HighFlex modality. And this is where the student is able to choose how they want to participate in any given class meeting, online or face-to-face. So it's different than hybrid because we're not saying you have to come to class every, Tuesday at 7 o'clock for 5 weeks, and then, the rest of it is online. That's just one example, but we're not telling the students that they have to come at a particular time point. The student gets to choose. So essentially the course is designed to be delivered face-to-face and to be delivered online. It's one section, and students can decide whether they want to come in person or participate online on any given class meeting basis. So this one, and I know it came up in a presentation maybe yesterday, the day before, has been very tricky for us, for the data folks, to try to understand how best to classify this type, because there could be students who are participating fully online. They're never stepping foot in a classroom and they are online. And there are students who might completely participate in person. And then of course, there are the students who could be blending modalities. And when this first emerged, we asked campuses to let us know, are faculty tracking student participation in any way? And by and large, the answer that we got was no, and that faculty would not be tracking any kind of student level participation, which would make it difficult for us to determine if it's how students are participating. So right now, we don't consider that to be a fully online course type, and we kind of keep it separate from the rest of our data when we're looking at the numbers of course sections that are online. We may have to continue to reconsider that in the future, depending on its usage. But I included in here because it is now one of the instruction types. So your campus folks can use that as a value in Cirrus when they're saying what kind of course section it is. But again, if you're telling students they have to come for any particular course sections in person, then that would be hybrid. So we would prefer you to use the hybrid code if that's the case. And I'm happy to answer any questions about these if anyone has any. So I'm just going to pause for a second because I know that with HighFlex, there have been some questions. So if you do have a question about that, please feel free to put it in the chat. And if not, I'll move forward. But if you do have any questions that come up for you about these course section types at any point during the presentation, feel free to let me know and I can always come back to it. Oh, Lilia, yep.
Lilia, you need to unmute. You need to unmute.
And I'm gonna, okay, so could HighFlex include live streaming as well? Sure. So HighFlex could include any parts of synchronous or asynchronous. Really, though, again, it's that you're not mandating that a student has to participate in any given type of modality. They get to choose. That's really the important part of this definition. And HighFlex doesn't include fully asynchronous. So again, it can, right? So the online portion of HighFlex could be synchronous, could be asynchronous, but there also needs to be that option to participate in person. and a student gets to choose when they want to participate in which modality. If you're structuring it so a student has to participate asynchronously in this given time and then come to the classroom at that particular time, that would be hybrid. If they have to participate, asynchronously and they have to participate synchronously, again, I'm not saying anything about face-to-face, then that would be the combined online type. So it really, hybrid and high flex depends on student choice. And then the combined online type versus hybrid and high flex depends on if there's actually any face-to-face instruction involved or not. So Tom, that's a good question. If they're requiring students to choose at the beginning of the semester, is that high flex? And I saw a comment about that earlier on, and I would like to learn more from the campuses that are asking students in the beginning. I'm curious if they're asking students their preferences and then students still have the choice to change their mind later, or if they're actually, only participating in that format. Right, Kim. So how are they tracking student preference? So I would like to learn more about how that's actually working at those institutions to be able to say what kind of coding it should be. All right, so I'm going to table that for a moment just so I can keep moving on. But Tom, I think it's a good question, and I think we need to learn more about how that's actually being implemented. All right. So we also have some definitions for students. So we have online student intent, which is a data field that we collect again through Cirrus, where what we want to know here is what is a student's intention? Are they wanting to be an online student? Are they planning to participate mostly online? Or are they intending to be a face-to-face student? This is a data field that we added back in 2017. Not all of our campuses are using it yet, which makes it problematic to actually, gather insights from it. But the idea here is that we don't want to just know what classes they're taking once they've enrolled in them. We want to know really, are they considering themselves to be an online student? And this can be helpful because we can get that information at the time of application, and we can make sure we're prepared to support those students. Now, again, the whole paradigm has shifted in terms of how we're supporting online students with the remote to transition to online. But this has actually become even more important to track because now we have students who on paper maybe all look like they're online or blending with online and face-to-face to some degree. And we don't have an easy way of differentiating who those students are who are actually intending to be online students, which can make planning going forward a little bit tricky as well. So I'll talk about that a little bit more at the end, but just know that that is something we are still really encouraging that our campuses collect either through the application or maybe their major declaration form, just having some way of capturing that information in your student information system is really important. Then we have a student online status, and typically we at System and campuses would do this on their own as well, would calculate this field based on, like I said before, the percentage of course sections that someone is taking that are actually online. So a student might be taking 75% of their course sections online, or 100% of their course sections online, or none of their course sections online. And we would calculate this, and we're still doing that. But the problem for us at System is we don't get that data until after the end of term data is submitted, which can be a couple months after the semester is actually ended, which delays our ability to understand the data and report on the data. So what we've actually added in fall 2020 is the same data element that we normally calculate, but we are asking campuses to report it to us because you all know which courses your students have enrolled in. You're able to calculate that and send that to us through Cirrus in the early student submission, so we can get a sense of that much earlier than we can by calculating it. And I'll talk about this again a little bit later when I show you some of this data. But that is new for 2020, and hopefully that will get a little bit better with reporting as we move on. Just checking the chat, Deborah, one more question on modalities. Do we have a name for a combination of face-to-face, synchronous online, and asynchronous online? Yes. So that would be hybrid or high flex, depending on student choice. So if those modalities are planned, And those face-to-face courses are defined, and a student has to come, certain days of the week, certain times. They don't have a choice in the matter, then that would be hybrid. If all three of those are existing simultaneously and students can choose which ones they're participating in on any given course section basis, then that would be high flex. Hopefully that answers your question, Debbie. Great. Okay, so just diving in a little bit more, and again, some of this might be too many details, but I just want to give you a sense. We've talked about a lot of this already, what we're collecting in Cirrus, and again, that's that section online instruction type. That's really important for us to be able to do those calculations later. Online student intent is what I just talked about, as well as online student status, the new field that we're collecting. There are a couple of other fields that we've added into Cirrus at various points that we don't rely upon as much just because they're not consistently reported and we haven't really emphasized them. Putting them here just so that if anyone from IR is on the call, you're not confused as to why I'm not talking about those. They do exist, but we just don't utilize them as often. And then in the academic programs office, we also maintain records of which programs have distance ed approval. And we're also maintain the percentage of the program that's offered online. So again, 50%, 75%, 100%. That's also a value that we show on the what is currently open.suny.edu website when students are searching for programs. That percentage is visible to them. And then in the Suny data warehouse, we're also tracking who are our Suny Online Degrees at Scale students and which sections we offered within the Suny Online Degrees at Scale platform. So we can do some analyses on that. And we also, again, calculate that online student status after that term section data is submitted. And that was, again, because we didn't usually ask the campuses to tell us that information. We are starting to do that, but we have traditionally calculated it after we got that term section data. Okay, just a little bit about iPads. I've mentioned some of this before. There is also a link at the bottom if anyone's curious for more details about iPads. But these are the data elements that are collected in iPads about distance education. So the first is an institutional characteristic. It's really just, does your campus offer online courses or programs? It's basically a yes or no. In the completions section, where campuses report on the number of completions, so awards, by zip code, which is a category of programs, and by program level, they ask the campuses to check yes if a program is offered at the distance education as a distance education program. So it's not necessarily saying that all of those completions are were online. It's just saying that those students had the opportunity to participate in online modalities. So if you ever see data that's national and it's showing completions by different programs, and this is some of the data that you might see if you were looking in, let's say, MZ or Burning Glass, there will sometimes be a filter for distance education offered, and this is where that data is coming from. And it's not saying that all those students completed an online program, it's just saying that they completed a program where the opportunity existed to complete it online. So that's just a little nuance that's important to know. So enrollment is really the type of data that we see compared on a national level, and fall enrollment is typically what has been collected, and it asks for the number of online students who are exclusively online, 100%, right? Some but not all online, so they're taking some online classes, but not all of them, or not online at all, and it asks that by student level, and then it also asks for exclusively online students, it asks for their residency or if they're in-state or out of state. So that is the data that is typically collected and compared nationally, and I believe it's been collected since 2012. And I have a slide later that will look at iPads data, so you'll be able to see those trends. And new is a 12-month report. So this will include data for the whole year rather than just the fall. So it's going to be on a July 1st to June 30th cycle of the prior year. So this is just being collected for the first time now for the last year, and it will ask the number of online students, again, by exclusively online or some but not all online. Now, this will not be able to get down to the level of residency because students may change their residency status throughout the year. So typically why we talk about fall data instead of academic year data is because we're actually able to talk about student demographics because it existed in that point in time. When we expand to academic year, it gets a little bit more tricky because students can change some of their attributes throughout the academic year. So that's just a little bit about iPads and what you might see when folks are sharing national data. This is what's collected. So now going back to Suny, just talking a little bit about, well, actually, I guess I have some iPads information in here too. Just talking about reporting and what was asked of campuses to report in all these terms where we've had COVID transitions. So in spring 2020, when we first transitioned to remote, campuses were asked to report their course section instruction types as they were originally planned and advertised for the semester. So if a course transitioned from face-to-face to online, it was reported as face-to-face. So when we look at those numbers for spring, we shouldn't really see much of an impact because those numbers were reported as the courses were originally offered. We certainly might see differences in outcomes, right? Because a lot was going on in spring 2020. But again, the actual numbers of online course section types being offered shouldn't really be impacted. And same thing with iPads there's no spring specific reporting, it's just fall 2019. So that should be unaffected by that transition. Then we move on to the summer. And again, a lot of campuses offered their courses online for the summer, but it wasn't a transition so much as that was how the course was offered. So you will see that most courses in the summer were offered online. And so those numbers will be higher than previous summers. And you'll see an impact in the 2019-2020 academic year enrollment numbers because summer 2020 is counted as the academic year summer for some of our campuses. So I'll show those numbers later and you will see a little bit of a bump because of summer 2020. Now iPads, because we have the new 12-month report, which does include the summer, I think the numbers shouldn't be too inflated because it is just the summer, but the summer courses will be included. So unfortunately, it's the first time that we're reporting this data in iPads, and it probably won't be I don't want to say accurate because it will be accurate to reflect what actually happened, hopefully, but it might be a little bit inflated as to what would have normally happened without COVID. So we'll have to keep that in mind when we're looking at those first numbers. Will winter session be included in spring? In fall? No. So the fall, when we look at fall term data, it's just the fall. When we're looking at academic year data, then yes, the winter does come into play as well. And I didn't talk about winter specifically in these slides, but yes, if there are more courses that were online in the winter, then that would impact it for academic year numbers. Although I think most classes are typically online in the winter term, so it probably wouldn't have created too much of a difference. So then getting to fall and spring numbers, again, campuses were asked to report those numbers based on the instruction type they were when the semester began. And again, similar to summer, those courses were set up as some sort of online modality for the most part, right? You might have still had some in-person sessions, but they're being reported as they are on record, as your students signed up for them. SUNY Institutional Research did also ask campuses to manually report the number of course sections that switched modalities throughout the semester. I have a slide to show that in a little bit later, so I will explain that a little bit more. But basically, we wanted to know, if a certain percentage of courses were in person at the start of the term, did those transition to online at some point throughout the semester because of challenges of COVID? And that data that was collected manually shows that, that trend. So fall 2020 data end 2020-21 academic year, online learning numbers will be greatly inflated. There are plenty of students, like we heard from earlier today, who transitioned to remote and would not have otherwise chosen to take online courses. So it's going to look like a lot more online activity occurred because a lot more online activity did occur. It's just going to make it tricky when we're comparing enrollment numbers, because of course, not all of those students intended to be online students. And that's where that online student intent variable could really have helped us out a lot, if it's consistently reported, because then we'd be able to differentiate between those students who had originally planned to be online versus those who did not. And again, campuses were also asked to report that student online status in Cirrus for the first time. So that was another change for the fall. For iPads, fall 2020 and that 12-month data will be affected. You probably won't see fall 2020 data though for a while. iPads tends to lag. So right now, fall 2018 data is the most recent data that's in iPads. So you won't see fall 2020 for a while. And I'm not sure when the 12-month data is anticipated to be released, but I'm sure it will look a bit different again than it might have otherwise looked. NC-SARA data, so for those of you who are part of NC-SARA, that data follows pretty much the same methodology as iPads. So it will most likely also be affected. It will probably look like there are more students attending online modalities because there were. So again, it doesn't get to the level of detail to say that a student intended to be online. It doesn't tell us if they're actually enrolled in a program or just a few courses, right? So there are always those caveats with some of that data to keep in mind. And we will see some differences when that data eventually does get released. And NC-SARA data also includes not just enrollment, but also learning placements, so out-of-state learning placements. So that's another piece where we'll have to see how that was affected going forward. Okay, so I'm just looking at the chat. Do you have a way to assess intent of courses to be online or moved online remotely as a result of COVID? It's a great question, Diane. And it's something we talked a lot about before the fall 2020 semester began. And unfortunately, we don't have a good way at the system level to differentiate. Now, some campuses do. I know some campuses created codes locally for remote versus online, and they're able to differentiate in that way. Some campuses took their list of courses, that were on record in the spring, planned for the fall, and then kept a record of where all those changes occurred. And we would have loved to be able to collect that data systematically and be able to look at those differences. But after having a lot of conversations with campus stakeholders, particularly the IR and registrar groups, it became obvious that it would be very challenging because not all of it was being collected systematically in student information systems. I think it became clear that the course types in Banner could only be, one course type, so it wasn't going to reflect those changes, and it would be really hard to report, especially if it's something that was being kept manually. So we would love for those campuses that did differentiate locally, if they're planning to do any analyses of student outcomes based on the courses that transitioned to remote versus the courses that were originally planned to be online, we would love to see that. And we have put a call out to the Doodle group to see if anyone was doing that work. I don't think we got much of a response, but yeah, it would be really nice to see those differences, Diane. It was just difficult to collect that. All right, so moving on to a variety of charts. Hopefully you like charts because I've got a lot of them. And again, feel free to ask questions at any time. So these are the data trends we're seeing for the summer. These are summer terms going from summer 16 to summer 20. And the gray section is the not online course section type. So again, this is going back to our section online enrollment types. The dark blue at the top is asynchronous. The blue after that is combined online, and then the light blue is synchronous. High flex is a small yellow band that you really can't see, but it is right there between the orange and the light blue on summer 2020. And then orange is hybrid. So you'll see in summer 2020, there are, of course, a lot more asynchronous and synchronous courses offered than there typically would have been in any other summer. So this data for summer is complete. So this is what the trend looks like for the summer. Alex, I do think this data is pretty accurate. I do think that I think one of the challenges with these remote courses, I don't know if it was so much in the summer, but with, maybe the major terms, is that on record, something might have been, let's say, hybrid. And then the instructor decided mid-semester or even at the beginning of the semester, we'll just do everything online. Something like that may not have been accurately reflected. So there might actually have been a little bit more online activity than we think. But I'm not surprised. You think it should be higher, Alex, the 59%?
No, I'm surprised that it's that high. I would have thought that the combined would have been higher. Combination of synchronous and asynchronous. Everything that I'm hearing from remote faculty and students is that they are doing some version of that combined. So that 59% to me is incredibly surprising.
Okay, so I think you're probably right. I think you're probably spot on that observation. I think the combined online term still has some confusion surrounding it. And I think it probably wasn't as used as much. So I think when I say I think the data is pretty accurate, I think that taking those 3 chunks of online types and combining them to say, this is the percentage of online is probably pretty accurate. But you may be onto something with the combined not being used quite as much. Yeah, I think that's probably true. And again, it could be one of those things where with the synchronous courses, I'm sure many of them might have some asynchronous elements. And again, that might not be reflected in the data. So I think that's true. And we do cautiously look at this as well in terms of differentiating between asynchronous, combined, and synchronous. So we haven't really done any outcomes analyses looking at those differences because we know we're still working on getting those definitions to be accurately reflected. And yes, it is very important to be able to distinguish them. So if anyone on here, is concerned that your campus is not accurately reporting these, feel free to connect with me and we can look at your campus data and we can see if you think it's right or not and connect with your institutional research folks to make it more accurate. And again, I think part of the challenge too is that a lot of campuses have local definitions that differ from the exact definitions in the CIRRUS data dictionary, and then making those crosswalks, has to be done in a way that makes sense. And sometimes that can be a little bit confusing as well. Yes, I can restate that. So combined is a fully online modality. Combined means it has elements of synchronous and asynchronous, but it's all online. There's no face-to-face component. And hybrid means there is a face-to-face component. So that is the difference.
Kristen?
Yes.
I think that synchronous and asynchronous relates to the direct instruction part of the course, right?
Yes.
So I think that's another part of the definition. And so I think that's maybe where there may be also some confusion. So I think it is worth sharing that definition out. We can, talk about that within the Doodle group as well if you want, but it probably, I don't know that Doodle is the one who's coding or the ones who are coding in the
Sure.
SIS. So that's where the clarification needs to be made.
Yes. Yeah. And so, but I think it's a good starting point. If you are concerned about your campus data and you want to take a look at what it looked like just for your campus, and if you think it doesn't look like what it should be, then we can talk to the registrar or the institutional research person who's inputting that data and make sure it is updated. And we've been doing this for several years now, working on these data definitions. Well, not working on the definitions, but working on the reporting of these data elements. So we will continue to do that. All right. So I'm going to switch my slide to fall, and I'm going to make the huge caveat that we are still missing 20 campuses from the fall 2020 reporting. This is why I did all of these out of 100%. So you could see the relative differences, but it's not by number, because that would then look much different. So take this with a grain of salt. It's going to change. This is not any kind of final data. It's preliminary because we're missing these campuses. But this is what it's looking like so far, which would be a greater percentage of hybrid. That to me seems a little high. And so Alex, yeah, I think we need to see how this actually turns out once we have all the data. But we're seeing a lot of synchronous here, which I guess I'm not too surprised by, because I think that's the remote format that a lot of courses took on. Yeah,
Kristen, I think when you think about direct instruction, right? If faculty are replacing what were their, face-to-face class sessions with Zoom sessions, then asynchronous is appropriate.
It's synchronous, right?
Or synchronous,
right,
yes.
Right, and so we would see a big shift there. I agree. I think that's true. Yeah, direct instruction. I don't know if I would equate it to seat time, but yeah, I mean, it's the delivery of the instruction, not just a homework assignment or a test or something like that. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to move on from this slide because, again, it is just wildly preliminary, but I wanted to share with you what we had so far, and also reiterate that this is why this data, it's a challenge for us at System, because it does come so delayed. So for us to be able to see all of this, we had to kind of have some other workarounds for the fall. Okay, so this slide looks really like a lot, I know, but this is actually coming directly from institutional research, and it's a summary of all of their data that they collected through those mode of instruction surveys that I talked about earlier. So there were those questions like we were talking about with Diane before about, tracking courses that were originally planned to be face-to-face and then they shifted online, and we couldn't really get at that level of detail. But we still wanted to get at the level of detail of if it started in person in the beginning of the semester and it shifted to online or hybrid later on, we wanted to be able to capture that. So essentially, the Institutional Research Office sent a survey to the institutional research contacts at each campus to fill out a survey at different points in time. So you'll see that there's September 1, October 15, November 15, December 15. And then actually on this slide is February 1st, which would be the beginning of the spring semester. So you can see if there are any differences there. And then this is broken out by the total all the way to the left, and then different sectors in the other bar charts. But you'll see that, the majority of courses were online, and they mostly stayed pretty steady. And after December 15th, which makes sense because at that point, after Thanksgiving, most campuses were shifting to fully online. That was part of their plans. You see a little bit of a dip in the in-person components. So I think that's pretty much what we would expect to see. And the levels of in-person instruction going from the beginning of the fall to the beginning of the spring, those are pretty similar as well, although there is a bit of a dip in the comprehensive colleges. They had some more face-to-face, 20% were face-to-face at the beginning of the fall, and then that dropped to 13% at the beginning of the spring. So otherwise, I think this is probably what we expected to see. But again, if there were any big shifts, we wanted to be able to document that and report on that. So that is how we collected this data in the fall, and how we're continuing to collect the data in the spring. Just going to pause if there are any more questions about course types or this slide in particular. Okay, I will move on. So now we're talking about students instead of just course sections. We're talking about students enrollment. So again, using those categories of exclusively online or some but not all online. The red is the exclusively online and the orange is some but not all online. This is our data for the academic year. So these are the trends we've been reporting for the academic year. You can see from 2011-12 up until 2019-20. And as I said earlier, 2019-20 would be impacted by COVID slightly because of the summer 2020. Most of the community colleges and a few state ops use summer 2020 as part of the academic year. If you didn't know this, in any given, in an academic year, some of our colleges in Suny use the leading summer, and some of them use the trailing summer as what is their academic year. So this makes it a little bit tricky. But again, as I said, most of the community colleges and a few of the state ops use that trailing summer. So in this case, it's summer 2020 as part of their academic year. So you do see a bit of a bump here, right? You see pretty steady increases. And then you see a little bit of a bump. So it's about a 13.5 increase from 2018-19 to 2019-20. All these other increases were about 5.6%. So we would have expected to see about 204,678 students total if we had that kind of steady increase that we would have expected to see. But of course, it is a little bit higher. Now, when we do this for 2020 to 2021, I'm sure it's going to be much higher. Again, this is really just accounting for the summer and only about half of our campuses. So we're just seeing this bit of an increase, but going forward, it is probably going to look pretty different. But we won't see that data until much later in 2021, once the summer has ended and we're able to report on that. Camille, there is a dashboard for this data. This specific one actually does come from a dashboard. So if you go to online.suny.edu/dashboards, thank you, Erin. I knew you'd be right there with the link. You have to sign in, so click the blue button for Federation, and you can view this dashboard. Some of what I'm showing you is not part of the dashboards at the moment, although I could add them. Some of it I just pulled together for this presentation, but this slide in particular is a dashboard. You can drill down by your campus or your sector. So if you want to check out more information about this, it is there. All right, so this is where, again, we have preliminary data. Please take all of this with a grain of salt. It is not completed, but I just wanted to share what I could with you. And again, I have made all of these charts to be out of 100% because we're missing data, and I just wanted to show relative differences. So this is fall term data. Again, we rely a lot on fall term data because it's what enables us to share information about student demographics and get a more complete picture of who our students are. So this is dating back to fall 2012 and going to fall 2020. Yes, you will see two columns for fall 2020 because I'm using two different data sources to show you what we have so far. So up until fall 19, this is all data that we calculate at system using those course types that are sent in, and we look at the percentage of courses that a student is taking not online, some but not all online, and exclusively online. So we get those three categories. Same type of data that's reported to iPads. We're keeping with that same style. So you can see the increases across the top. The red is exclusively online. So you'll see that that has increased over time. And you'll see that the orange, which is some but not all online. So again, students are taking both in-person and online courses. That has also increased. And then for the fall, the first column you'll see, so the left-hand column for fall 2020, that is what we have so far of our end of term data. And again, we're missing 20 campuses. So when I showed you the course section data earlier, that was missing 20 campuses. This also is missing 20 campuses. I'm sure they'll have their data in very soon, but until we have that, we don't have the complete picture. But it is showing that about 88% of students were at least taking, one online course. Only 16% of our students were only taking face-to-face courses. And again, this is going to change once we get all that data in, but that's where we're at right now. And then the column on the right is showing that new online student status that campuses reported to us in the early student submission. So for this one, we're not missing any data submissions. We have all the data submitted. However, it's a new data element. So there is some room for error. And I do believe there are a couple campuses that didn't really report it accurately, but it could be relatively accurate. So that might be what we're actually looking at for this semester versus the incomplete data that we have on the left. So I wanted to share both of them with you. Of course, when we have all the data submitted for the end of term, we'll be updating these charts to actually reflect the final data. And we'll be working with campuses where there seem to be any discrepancies with that newly reported online student status. We'll try to get that right going forward so we can actually start using that data element to report on some of this data sooner. But again, this is just where we're at, a little snapshot of what we're seeing right now. So big differences. So nationally, for iPads data, I actually didn't put any numbers or percentages here, but my point was more so to just show the trend, right? Pretty steady upward growth in terms of the numbers of students who are exclusively online and some but not all online. And I think fall 19 is going to show a very similar trend. Again, that data is not released on iPads yet because it is a delayed cycle. But when fall 2020 comes in, it's going to be huge. It's going to look very different. And then, the question becomes, what's going to happen after that, in 2021 and beyond. But I do think that that data is going to look quite different. So one of the questions that I had in mind when I was putting together this presentation was trying to understand, where do we go from here, right? So we'll see this big jump in fall 2020. And for the academic year. And then what do we expect after that? Do we expect a lot of students to want more online courses? Do we expect more faculty to be prepared to teach online courses and then, want to do that going forward? I think those questions are ruminating. So I wanted to see if there were any insights we could gather from survey reports that have been put out there. So that's what the next couple of my slides are about. And I know we're running a little low on time, so I'm going to go through these a little bit quickly, but all the sources are here for you. So if you want to dive into any of these insights, you're more than welcome to do that. So the Chloe is a survey, changing higher ed landscape, online education, something along those lines. I'm totally getting the title messed up, but if you go there, the Chloe has a report that's been produced several times, and it's a survey of chief online officers. This one was conducted in 2019, and it shows some of the online learning plans pre-pandemic. So if you're curious what chief online officers were thinking before the pandemic, this report can give you some of that insight. So just a couple snapshots. For fully online courses, they asked, do you expect your campus to offer more online courses, about the same, or to decline? And at the undergrad and graduate level. And so you can see pre-pandemic, a lot of chief online officers were thinking that it would remain about the same or grow. So of course we were on sort of a growth trend, but there was the sentiment that in a lot of cases, it would remain the same. I think that may change, we'll see. And it also asked them for their plans for new fully online undergraduate programs in the next 3 years. And again, it looks like a lot of growth. At some of the smaller colleges, it looked like a little more, oh, thank you, Erin, and thank you, Peter. Changing landscape of online education. I was close. Landscape, there we go. So at those smaller institutions, there was a little bit more of a sentiment that maybe they were remaining stable, but overall, by and large, a lot of plans to be increasing anyway. Again, this is pre-pandemic. And then goals for online learning. So it asks chief online officers about their goals. And there was a lot of folks who wanted to increase quality, expand offerings, and increase enrollment. So these were already goals, before the pandemic, and I think they will probably continue to grow. So we'll see how that plays out in future Chloe reports. But the folks who run the Chloe actually did a quick report called the Chloe 5 to try to understand the pivot to remote instruction and its impact on the landscape. So they did survey 308 chief online officers in May, and this was really talking more about the transition to remote versus some of the other questions that they usually use to benchmark across the surveys. And the institutions in this survey on average moved over more than 500 courses online. They found that the pivot really affected 50% of faculty who had never taught online, right? 51% of undergrads and 27% of grads had never taught online, and that it really did have a great impact on all those folks, as we know. And I pulled out this quote that 25% of the chief online officers judged the campus-based faculty's attitudes towards online learning as very positive after going through the pilot. 42 thought faculty were somewhat positive, and 30% did not think faculty attitudes were affected by the remote experience, and about 11% had developed more of a negative view. So this is trending positive, that we think that faculty who have experienced the transition by and large are thinking positively about the opportunities for teaching online. But again, we'll have to see how that plays out in Suny. And just again, a couple snapshots, I think actually just one from this one. But again, there's a ton of information in the survey. So if you are interested in learning more, you can go to their survey. But this is about students' interest in learning online. So, and this is the perspectives of the chief online officers. So they're thinking that many students, over 50%, have somewhat increased their interest for undergrads, and then plus the additional 10% that have strongly increased their interest. They really do think undergrads are going to have, a strong interest in having more online opportunities post-pandemic. And similarly with the graduate students, although some of them think that they'll be more likely to be unchanged. So again, a lot of information is in these reports if you're interested in looking at them. Peter Shea in the chat said he's on their board. So hopefully, Peter, I didn't misinterpret anything, but feel free to chime in if you want. But these are great resources if you want to take a look at any of that additional data. And then one more survey that I want to mention to you is that the one that's conducted by Titan Partners. They did a 3-part analysis called Time for Class COVID-19 edition, and they do these annual reports as well called Time for Class. And they did this in 3 parts where they assessed the transition to remote learning, understanding the plans for the fall, and then evaluating some of the practices that were implemented in the fall. So there are actually 3 distinct reports for this. And I'm just going to highlight some things that they noted in the 3rd report, which was from a survey of 852 faculty who teach intro level courses from 600 different institutions. And they noted some of the practices that they think will persist post-pandemic. So the use of asynchronous pre-recorded materials, increased modularization of content and learning outcomes, more frequent informative assessment, use of digital tools to engage students, foster collaboration and assess learning, and targeted and individualized outreach and support to students who need it. So I thought that was interesting. And again, ton more information in there. But thinking forward, and how we need to support faculty and students, I thought these data points were interesting about some of the practices that faculty are anticipating to continue to use. And then one more thing from that report was about faculty sentiment. And they're actually showing not too much of a change. So they're showing the percentage of faculty who agreed or disagreed with the statement, online learning is an effective method for teaching. And they're showing it for before COVID on the left, and then in preparation for fall 2020 in the middle, and then actually during fall 2020 on the right. That's for the chart on the left-hand side of this page. And so there's a little bit of an increase in faculty who are agreeing to that statement, prior to COVID and going forward, but it's not wildly different. That's my interpretation of this, at least. And then you can see a different type of chart on the right where it kind of shows different individuals and their sentiments changing over time. So again, a lot in those reports. Feel free to check them out. But I know we're running out of time, so I want to just get back to the last couple slides, which are some considerations for moving forward. The first is just to be really mindful of how, all of this data will be interpreted once it starts to be released. 2020, 2021 is going to be a big asterisk, right? Anytime we talk about this data, it's going to be related to the fact that we were in a global pandemic and we had this big shift to remote. So we'll just have to be mindful of that going forward. It's not going to be, I don't expect that it will be cleanly reported across the board as well. So when we talk about iPads, although they offered guidance on, how that data should be reported, we have to always assume that there may be some mistakes, in how that was reported. So we'll see how that goes. We'll see what it looks like when it's released. Online student intent, again, tracking and reporting this is super important. This is a Suny data element that we are really trying to get more traction on. If your campus is asking students their intention on their application, if your campus has different local program codes for the online format and the not online format, that's another way of tracking it in your SIS. And if you're really not sure what we're talking about here, please reach out to me. Happy to have conversations, and also happy to check if your campus is reporting that data or not, if you want to continue to have that conversation. And then there are some survey insights that will be forthcoming from Suny. So there's a Fact2 faculty survey that just was completed recently, and that survey was asking faculty their perspectives about online teaching pre and post pandemic to see if there is a shift there. There was a University Faculty Senate campus survey asking campuses about their online learning governance structures. So a little bit of more detail on, course approvals and how, our course is reviewed, what's that cycle like, things like that. And then the Suny student opinion survey, which is typically done every 4 years, that's changing a little bit as we go forward, and Suny is creating an in-house survey in collaboration with a lot of the campus institutional research officers, and that always asks about student satisfaction with campus services. But we did make sure there were some questions to ask about the extent to which students were taking courses online, and if they would have taken those classes online if it weren't for the pandemic. So we'll be able to sort some of that data to get an idea of students' experiences. And Camille, can we get results? Okay, so all the surveys. So the Fact2 survey will be analyzed by the Fact2 Explode task group, and they'll, I'm sure, share findings on that once they have them. I'm not completely plugged into where UFS is at with their survey, but if I can, I have asked for access to their data once it's cleaned up and ready to be shared. So I will be happy to share that out if I'm allowed to once we get that. And then the SOS survey will be happening later this semester, and that is always shared back with the campuses after that is completed. So that will be there. And then lastly, just want to say, keep an eye on the dashboards. This link was put in the chat earlier, but the data for the enrollment trends and student demographics, all of that will be updated once it's available. Again, you have to log into that with your Suny Federation. So you have to click the blue button and then log in. And then they're also, for anyone who might be on the call who's from institutional research or who's familiar with the OBI dashboards, if you go to suny.edu/analytics, again, Suny Federation, you should all have access to it. There's a variety of dashboards there. And there are some specifically for online learning. The Open Suny terminology is still used there, so you'll see it called Open Suny, but there are lists of online programs showing which programs are listed on open.suny.edu, showing which programs have the signature program status. Also, one thing I want to point, and there's a variety of other dashboards, but one other that I want to point out is that there is one that lists all of the students who are 100% online by state. And that is what's actually needed for NC SARA reporting. And one of the institutional research officers a year or so ago had asked for this, and we added it in. So that one could be very useful for your campus if you're doing NC SARA data reporting. So I just wanted to mention that one. And I think that's probably all we have time for, but thank you so much for joining me for this session. I know I am in between you and probably eating some food, hopefully eating some food. So I will leave you with all that information. I'm happy to share these slides, happy to answer any questions at any point. from any of you. And please check out the dashboards and let me know if you have any questions.
Thanks, Kristen. We are at time, but as Kristen mentioned, she's got her contact information up there, and I know she'd be very happy to to chat with you. We are having a break now, and I just want to mention that at 1:30, I hope you'll come back for the HyFlex presentation. We talked about the definitions in this session, and we have an opportunity to hear from a panel on their lessons learned and challenges and the opportunities that they encountered in implementing HyFlex on their campuses. So I hope you'll come back for that session at 1:30. It's a panel, and I really appreciate the presentation. Kristen, it's so important to have all of this information. And so thank you so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you all for listening.